Where there's thunder, there's lightning. John Nada. So this is a discussion that I've been having with a friend of mine off and on for the past couple months, but many of you will be able to resonate with this struggle in terms of shift work and sleeping and sleep disorders and that sort of thing. I've not historically had a whole lot of issues with sleeping. And particularly when I went into the military, it actually became easier for me to sleep, as many of you who have been in the military have experienced that ability to fall asleep almost anywhere. And for the longest time, I wasn't a morning person until after the military, when, I'd find myself waking up spontaneously at 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and then wanting to be in bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. But over the past couple of years, I've worked a series of jobs that, there's been a lot of shift work involved. There's been a lot of, just night shift and coming in early and staying late, and not a whole lot of stability and routine with them. And so as a result of that, it creates some difficulties in sleeping from time to time. And so that is what this video basically is the result of my inability to sleep at the moment. So what I've been thinking a lot about is this idea of history repeating itself. In the midst of this virus situation that we're facing, one cannot help but reference previous situations where there was a virus, previous situations where there was some sort of flu or whatever the case may be. What I immediately thought about in the early going of all this was that nobody really knows anything. And so, of course, that creates a panic in much the same way that when HIV and AIDS popped onto the scene, there was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of panic. There was a lot of not knowing what is going to come next. And now there's commercials on television for HIV medications. And who would have thought, the early to late 80s that there would be a medication for HIV, let alone a commercial about medication for it. Just sort of talked about in a kind of just a blasé, way that it wasn't when the thing first came out. So, or was first, I guess, discovered. So history repeats itself. And what that lends itself to, in my mind, too, is when you're talking about history repeating itself, that's kind of how many of us came to this whole MGTOW realization. That was the red pill, in effect, for many of us, was just seeing time and time again the same patterns and the same scenarios playing out with these relationships and with these women that we talked to and that we dated. And in fact, the ability to recognize patterns is kind of an built-in reaction to the external inputs of the world. If I can recognize certain patterns, then my possibility or probability of survival goes up. If I can see that an animal has certain color patterns, in a very real sense of patterns, I may know to stay away from that snake, or I may know to stay away from that plant due to, the texture or the shape of the leaf or the color of the bands on a snake. But patterns, nonetheless, don't necessarily always have to be physical in nature. And so I was reading something again about the whole sex doll thing and just how that has really taken off over the past couple of years. I know several years ago it was very underground, it was very taboo, and I would argue that to some extent it probably still is, especially depending on the part of the world you're in. But now that's being discussed pretty openly, and and actually being kind of treated seriously to some degree. So why would I bring that up? it got me thinking that somebody had asked the question, it's been, of course, brought up every time that the whole love doll thing gets brought up. The idea of companionship, the idea of a connection. And so the argument is, well, you're better off just risking your resources and your freedom and everything on a woman, because the sex doll will never be able to give you affection or love or companionship. You can't have a connection with it. And we've talked about that here more than once, I'm sure. And I'm certain for sure that it's been brought up on other channels as well. But when I think about the majority of the relationships that I've had, maybe with the exception of one or two, but even those had their issues. You don't really have a connection with a woman, or at least I haven't, and most guys that I know, especially those in the MGTOW world, have not really had a connection with a woman that was not tied into something transactional. Be it you're, taking them out on dates, you're buying them things, you have resources and status to kind of latch onto, or whatever that thing might be. But the reality of it is that you don't really have a connection with that woman either. And there's really no trust with that woman. And it's kind of interesting because, yes, it's true to say there's not really a connection with a doll, and you have no need to trust a doll. But the thing about it is, the doll, in some ways, is just as real as the woman in terms of affection, in terms of the ability to connect and to trust. The only difference between the doll and the woman is that the doll is not plotting behind your back. The doll's not cheating on you. The doll's not using you for whatever. And so the other part of it is that I know for me, one of the things that I've always wanted in a relationship but never really seemed to find was the ability to have some sort of an intellectual conversation with a woman. Be it talking about UFOs or Bigfoot, sort of that Art Bell coast to coast type subject matter, or be it the more weightier things of life. Who are we? Why are we here? The meaning of life, so to speak, the human experience, and not only being able to discuss those things with that person, to work those things out with that other person, but to feel like that person is there for you, to feel like that you can lean on that person and trust that person, and to feel as if you have somebody in life that is going through it with you, is having the same difficulties, the same hopes, fears, dreams, aspirations, and everything, but that you have teamed up together to take on the forces of life and the universe, as it were. To feel like you have somebody going through this life with you. And I think that that's really at the heart of what most men want. It's been bandied about that the only thing men care about is sex, and yet if that's the only thing that you offer, if that's the only value, good, or service that you bring to the table and to the relationship, well, then is it really the man's fault? And yet I think that most men are longing and wanting and searching for so much more. And that's kind of where the whole MGTOW thing comes in again. Many of us have had a lot of the same experiences with women. Many of us have had a lot of the same experiences when it comes to dating and relationships, and certainly marriage and divorce, child custody, child support, all that stuff. All one woman, just a different face. And that's the thing. Many of us were led to believe that there was something wrong with us, that, well, you're failing with all these different women. It must be a problem with you. It must be some issue with you. You must not be doing something right. we were never told that, yeah, it's different women, but they only appear to be different. It's the same woman, just different faces. And of course, nobody's going to blame the woman. Nobody's going to put any responsibility or, shared accountability on the women. So it has to be your fault. You've had, 9 or 10 girlfriends. You've gone on, 20 or 30 different dates. And every one of them ends the same. So it has to be your fault. That's what we're told. That's the bill of goods that we've been sold. And it took me the longest time to realize that, no, it wasn't my fault. Because when I realized that I was not the only one experiencing these things, that there were thousands upon thousands of other men out there experiencing things, and I saw that history was repeating itself with men from all different walks of life, ethnicities, religions, nationalities. When I saw that it wasn't just happening to me, but it was happening to most of the men that I knew, and in fact, it seems to happen to most men in general. That's when I realized that the problem wasn't really with me, just as the problem was never really with you. They were simply trying to blame the nearest man. Now, I remember one time a relationship that I had with a girl a while back. And it wasn't the best relationship. It wasn't really the longest relationship. And I remember in a moment of weakness, we had both, went out that night or whatever, and we'd had some drinks here and there. And in a moment of weakness, I remember saying to the girl, I just want someone, I want to be with somebody that has my back. And, we were both still somewhat buzzed. I don't think that we were all together, in our right minds at that point. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but I did later. And she never really said anything about it. I don't know if she really even heard what I had to say. But I realized what I had done. I realized, what I had said. And the realization came to me that not just with this person, but particularly with this person, that was never going to be a reality. And really, honestly, would never be a reality with anybody. I think that I heard what I said more than she did, and yet I was the one that said it and had that realization of, isn't that what most guys want? Isn't that what most of us, at one point or another were looking for, until we realize that what we were looking for doesn't exist? And so coming to that realization of, I'll never meet somebody that has my back. I'll never meet somebody that doesn't have some sort of a ulterior motive. I'll never meet somebody whose love is not conditioned upon something. More than likely, I'll never meet somebody who loves me for me and not how I make them feel or what I can do for them. And so during all this virus stuff, I had this thought, but it was born more out of a feeling. Meaning I had the feeling, I knew it deep down before I ever verbalized it or thought about it. But this is a good time to go your own way right now. When you look at the chaos, when you look at the panic, when you look at everything that's going on right now, and the people that are together in these relationships, they're not going out to eat, they're not going out on dates, they're having to actually spend time with one another, they're having to actually talk with one another. And yet again, history repeats itself. Brifault's law. Now, a lot of the benefits that these women entered into these relationships for to begin with have now kind of fallen by the wayside in the wake of what is going on right now. But then you also kind of have the opposite effect too on the other spectrum, in terms of a lot of women wanting to find a man in these troubling times to center them, to give them focus, to give them center in life, to provide for them, to make them feel secure. So again, we see these patterns. We see history repeating itself. We see that the center that we seek is the center of ourselves. You see, that's another problem with a lot of us, is we worry too much about jobs, we worry too much about money, we worry too much about a lot of the wrong things. Or rather, we put way too much emphasis, way too much worry into things that they are important. But there are far more important things out there. There are far more pressing issues out there. And no man is promised tomorrow. And so that's the thing. A lot of us get discombobulated. A lot of us go too far in one direction or not far enough in another. You see, the life without self-realization, the life without self-actualization has no center. The unexamined life has no center to it. And if you have no center, you're not balanced, and you're torn north, south, east, and west. So this is the time now. This is really a good time to reflect, to decide who it is you want to be and how it is that you're going to get there. Goals that you've had, dreams that you've had, even something as simple as hobbies that you've always wanted to pursue. You see, people look for fulfillment in others. Particularly men fall into this trap of thinking that somebody else is going to complete them, somebody else is going to make them happy. And while it's true that relationships to a point can make you happy, while it's true that your friendships, your relationships with your family, those are all important, those are all things that can make you happy. And there are those rare few, although not in modern times, that maybe have even found happiness in relationships that are not of a family or brotherly nature. The reality of it is that if you never know who you are, you'll never be happy. You'll never have peace. You'll never have joy. You'll never have contentment. And many people never even stop to think about that question of who they are. They just assume they have a first name and a last name, and that's all there is to them. But there's so much more to a person if they're willing to look within themselves and find out. Go your own way or don't.